Okay. Okay, thanks again, Declan, and hello to the law students. Okay, so what we are going to do in this, well, first of all, welcome back. So it's great to get the opportunity to talk to you again. You've probably, unfortunately, already heard my voice for probably the last 10 minutes or more. So that's a flavor of the other side of the coin. So what we'll do is we're going to go through the law stuff. So we will do what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go through the mock paper, okay, which hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at some point, okay. I'm going to go through the mock paper, give you some idea if there was the real paper as to what it is that we'd be looking for in terms of the answers. And then what I'll do is I'll put away the mock paper and I'll give you a quick flavor as to what's going to be on the main paper as well. But they are pretty similar, even more so than they are on the international side. They are pretty similar in the law side. So if you're able to do the mock paper pretty well, excuse me, you should be in reasonably good shape to do the real paper as well. Okay. In the interest of time, you're probably not too surprised to hear this. I've loaded up the answers to the multiple choice questions, so I'm going to hit send. All going well once I'm finished here. I have historically forgotten once or twice. If I do forget, apologies, but I will get them to you. My plan is to send the answers to the MCQs once we finish this session. So I'm not going to go through them now. Because our entire time will be gone by the time we get to the last one. Okay, so I'm going to send those out to you afterwards. You can go through them, see how you did. A lot of them will be familiar to you anyway. If you have any questions on them, though, you can come back to me. Okay, so this is going to be exclusively about the 4 long questions. That's what we're going to do. And you'll be answering on the exam. You'll be answering 2 of the 4 questions, and the format, obviously, in the mock paper is exactly the same as it is in the real one. Okay. So if we dive right in, looking at the first question on the mock paper, the first question is on contract law, okay? And that is not too surprising. It's going to be exactly the same in the real one. Different set of facts, but it is going to be on contract law as well, okay? So we'll just quickly read through it. Paddy in Dublin wrote to Mary in Cork, offering to sell his Mercedes car for €15,000. On receiving Paddy's offer, Mary telephoned him to say she would like to accept the offer. But because there was such a large amount of money involved, and because there were 1 or 2 more interested parties, Paddy said that he wanted Mary to confirm her acceptance in writing. He said if he received her acceptance the next day, which was Friday, he would go ahead with the sale at €15,000. Mary immediately wrote out her acceptance letter and posted it to Paddy in Dublin, using the standard post. Paddy received it the following morning, which again was Friday at 11 a.m. On Thursday evening, however, Paddy had received a better offer from a local guy, and he had written to Mary to withdraw his offer. This letter missed the last collection and was not received by Mary on Friday morning. Okay. So what we're basically looking for is, and this is it. This is in the notes along with an actual answer plan and some guidance. Okay, so you can review this again. So if we go into the notes towards the end of module 1, this is in here. This exact example is in here. Okay. But in terms of what it is we're looking for, not too surprisingly, the first thing we want to ask ourselves is there a contract? Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to be asking. Okay, and then we go into a few other bits and pieces. Okay, which would include the postal rule, given the facts that are here. But the first thing we're asking is there a contract? So 4 things you need for a contract: 1, you need an offer; 2, you need acceptance; 3, you need consideration; and 4, you need intention to create legal relations. Okay. And now is probably a good time to say, I mean, on the contract piece and also the tort piece, there's a tort question as well on the exam. As far as I'm concerned, there's no right answer. Okay. You can come to a conclusion, and the conclusion might be different to the conclusion that I would come to. But what you do need is you need to justify it. Okay. Judges don't always agree with each other in real life, so that's okay. You can take an argument, but you need to be able to back it up and say what it is. Don't just say I think there's an offer and then move on. Okay. You need to say why you think there's an offer. Okay. And if you think you're taking, maybe if you're swimming against the tide and maybe taking a view that other people wouldn't, that's okay. But do justify it and do spend a bit of time explaining why you think there's an offer. Okay. So the guidance I will give you on this one is, my own personal views, but you could come to another one instead. But going back to the facts, okay, is there an offer? So, if you look at the facts, it says Paddy in Dublin wrote to Mary in Cork to sell his Mercedes car for $15,000. Okay, so he didn't advertise it in the newspaper. He wrote to Mary and said, Mary, would you like to buy my car? Okay, So that would strongly suggest that there is an offer. Okay, all right. If we look at the next set of facts, on receiving Paddy's offer, Mary telephoned him and said she would like to accept the offer. Okay, so there is certainly talk of an acceptance there. Now, Paddy then throws a little bit of an extra thing into it and kind of says, okay, well, he'd like her to confirm, he'd like Mary to confirm it in writing, okay? And based on the facts that we see there, Mary kind of hangs up the phone and immediately starts writing her acceptance and then goes and posts it, okay? So is there acceptance? It certainly could be argued that there is. There's a phone call and then Mary writes the letter, okay? So there's a strong evidence there that there is acceptance. You can go a different way if you want, but just be prepared to justify it. And there's also nothing wrong in your answer saying, had Mary done this instead of that, or had Paddy done that instead of this, the outcome would have been different. And this is what I think the outcome would be. That's really good. It's what judges do all the time when they're summing up. Okay. So that's a really good thing to put into your answer. Okay. Worth a few marks. Okay. Is there consideration? That's the third thing we're asking ourselves. Okay. So we see it mentioned, I think like just from what I can see here twice. Paddy wrote to Mary in Cork offering to sell his Mercedes car for €15,000. And then further down, he said if he received her acceptance the next day, which is Friday, he would go ahead with the sale at 15,000. Okay, there's strongly suggests there is consideration. It's not Paddy offering his car to Mary as a present, or a kind of, well, looks like you need a car, Mary, why don't you take mine? That's not what it is. Okay, there's twice in the facts there is mention of 15,000. So is there a strong argument for saying there's consideration? There is. Okay. And then finally, the last thing we're talking about is intention to create legal relations. Okay. So again, if we go down through the facts, you have Paddy writing to Mary. Okay. You have Mary telephoning Paddy. You have Mary then hanging up the phone and writing a letter which is sent. You have Paddy sending later on, he kind of says, oh, I got a better offer, and he sends a letter back. Okay. Does that suggest a strong intention to create legal relations? In my view, yes. Okay. It's not kind of a WhatsApp message that then goes unresponded to for weeks. Okay. Where you can say, well, I don't know how serious it was. It's not a discussion in a pub around midnight. It's, there's at least, what is there? There's 3 letters actually in it, and there's a phone call. So is there a strong argument to suggest intention to create legal relations? Personally, in my view, yes, there is. Okay. So the first thing that we're doing in this case, and that we did in the assignment with Bobby Byrne, and that you're going to do in the exam is there a contract? Okay. That is the fundamental thing. So, I'm not going to be giving you the facts of the question, but today you'll get those in 2 weeks' time. But the very first question that I did ask on question 1 is, well, there's the facts. What do you think? Is there a contract? Okay. So there's a little bit more to the answer, but we'll go to that in a minute. But does anyone have any questions on that? No? Okay. So the other thing, I mean, in contract cases, when we give you the contract case, and it's the same in the real exam, we're not just going to ask you, is there a contract, and then it's bye-bye. There will be an ask for a second kind of piece, at least one more piece to it. And there will be a little bit of a curveball thrown in. Okay. In this example, the curveball is the poster rule. So that's the thing you need to talk about. We'll talk about that in a minute. In the Bobby Byrne case, it was, well, Bobby Byrne is 17. That was the curveball in that one. And there will be a little bit of a mini curveball in the final exam as well, which you will need to talk about a little bit. Okay. So there's not just, once you move past the offer acceptance, consideration, and legal relations, there are other sections in the notes, which if you're familiar with, you'll be able to answer the curveball part of the question, shall we say. Okay. So on that point, the postal rule. Okay. So the postal rule basically states that once the letter has been posted, it's not when you receive the letter, it's when the letter hits the post box or goes into the hand of the person behind the counter in the post office. That's when acceptance, if it's to accept something, that's when acceptance is deemed to have taken place. Okay. So that's what you want to talk about. So, okay, well, what letter arrived first? So that's the bit where maybe it's a little bit grayer as to kind of, there's letters flying back and forth. So you can kind of talk about, well, if that letter was posted before this letter, and you don't always know all the facts. So it's okay to kind of put in and say, okay, I'm working off the assumption that letter was sent first, and therefore I think that there is a contract, or based on that, I feel there isn't a contract. So the postal rule is the thing that you're looking to discuss on top of the offer, whether or not there's a contract. Okay. Okay, so we're going to move off that question now, unless there's any further questions on it. But just once again, is there a contract, offer, acceptance, consideration, intention for legal relations? Those are the 4 points you need to satisfy yourself with. And then finally, the main part there. I mean, you do want to also maybe just briefly talk about, is it is the offer just to Mary, or is it to the world at large? Okay, when it's the world at large, if somebody beats you to it, then so be it. It's first come, first served. When the letter is specifically to Mary and said, Mary, would you like to buy the car, rather than anybody on the planet, would you like to buy my car? It's a stronger offer than if you just throw it out to the wider world. Okay, so you might want to discuss that briefly. You definitely want to talk about the postal rule, because there are, as I said, 3 letters involved. Okay. So if there's no more questions on that, we'll move on to question 2. And question 2 is on company law, which is in module 2. Okay. So question 2 is, Murphy Limited has indicated in their company constitution that they will renovate houses and apartments and sell them at a market price. For 5 years, they continue this undertaking, but then following a review of costs and recent sales across the country, they determined that it's significantly more money to be generated by purchasing land and developing it. Without undertaking any changes in the company constitution, they embark on this new venture, borrow a significant amount of money from Loan Bank, and purchase their first plot of land. Okay. Outline the possible consequences for this action for Murphy Limited, describe how these limitations have been relaxed over time, and what steps Murphy Limited can take to avoid this problem. Okay. So consequences, first of all, there's 3. Okay. And it's kind of this part of the question is kind of, well, what happened next? And depending on what happened next, what's likely to be the outcome. Okay. So the first thing is the transaction could be void. Okay. So if an investor, the most likely person to object to something like this would be an investor. Okay. If an investor puts their hand up and says, hang on a sec, you're not allowed to do that, the transaction, and goes to the court about it, the transaction could be void. Okay. So the court might well say, right, no, you weren't allowed to do that. You need to go back to the way you were. So if Murphy Limited have borrowed money and have gone and invested in land, it may be, in inverted commas, it's not really that simple, but in inverted commas, it might be as simple as just returning the money to Loan Bank and returning the land to where it came from. If that's the scenario, that's not necessarily going to be too difficult. The problem may well be, let's say this investor only puts their hand up maybe 2 years later, when building is going to happen on the land and a lot of money has gone into it. That's where it could become tricky. But the first thing that could happen is the court might rule and say, well, no, you can't do that. You say in your company constitution you're doing this, you've gone off and done that. They're not the same thing. Significantly more risk might be involved in the second one. So they're going to say transactions void, put things back the way they were. Okay, that's the first possibility. Second one could be, let's say that Murphy Limited embark on this and it's a total disaster. Okay, so they build a big building on the land, and they can't sell it for lower money. There's been a property crash in the meantime. They can't sell it for lower money. They're down thousands of euro. They might, and then Loan Bank come looking for their money back. They might be able to claim, well, actually, we weren't entitled to do this in the first place. Loan Bank should have known that, and as a result, shouldn't have lent us the money. So we'd like to walk away and not repay the money. Now, what the court may well do is certainly possible outcome there is they're going to enforce a detrimental contract. They might say, well, hang on a sec, you can't wriggle out of it that easily. We're going to enforce the contract. Okay, so you good try, but we're going to enforce the contract. That's the second scenario that may happen. Okay, and the third scenario that could happen is that maybe Loan Bank are perfectly happy with the deal, maybe Murphy Limited is perfectly happy with the deal, but there's one nuisance investor who kind of keeps sticking their hand up and kind of saying, well, I'm not happy about it. What that investor could do is they could seek injunctions against it. Okay, so they might say, well, no, I'm still not happy. I don't want them to be allowed to do this. So they go to the court seeking an injunction to stop the transaction. Maybe they find out about it early or in time, so they can maybe try and stop it from happening at all. There's injunctions, there's discussions of injunctions, there's negative publicity in the newspapers. So those are all things that could potentially happen if the investor tries to get to stop the transaction from happening. Okay, so that's the first part of the question. Any questions on that? Okay, So another part of the question was, well, what are the relaxations that came in the 2014 Companies Act? So what happened in the 2014 Companies Act is previously there used to be what was known as an objects clause. So that used to be enforced very rigorously. So you had to follow what was in your objects clause. That's been simplified to a company constitution, okay? So that has made things a little bit easier, okay, because it's not as rigorously enforced, okay? And you can put in your company constitution a fairly general thing that says, you know, the directors of the company will pursue whatever endeavors they think is right to make money for the company. So that is allowed to do that. You can also register your company in a slightly different manner. Traditionally, it was a company model known as limited, okay? That there is an option to replace that with a company called a CLS, which has increased scope for business. And it'd be interesting to see if Murphy Limited was set up that way. So again, similar to the contract law, you can discuss, you don't have to be right or wrong, okay? You can say, if that was done, this is the way it might pan out. If the other thing was done, this is the way it might pan out, okay? So there's a couple of relaxations in the 2014 Companies Act. It's there in the notes, it'd be worth calling them out, okay? And then the last thing we're just going to cover off for this question is a couple of possible defenses, okay? So a couple of things. So let's say it all goes wrong. Investor kind of gets his or her way and kind of has been, you know, they've been allowed to kind of stop the transaction from happening. You know, a couple of things that either could have been done beforehand or maybe done afterwards. One thing that could be done beforehand is the directors be empowered to change the direction of the company. So, you know, just quite simply make the change or have, I mean, what you might do to maybe stop it happening again is get a clause put into the company constitution which says, you know, the directors will pursue whatever avenues of business within maybe the land development area that they feel is beneficial to the business, okay? Investors will probably like some sort of restriction that they can't just go off and maybe gamble the money away almost, but you could put that kind of more general term in there, and that way if somebody objects next time, the directors can point to it and say, well, it says here we can do that, you know? Another way to go about it is, if you want to kind of maybe kind of walk away from it, is prove that that Loan Bank had actual knowledge that the transaction was ultra vires, okay? So if you're able to prove, if Murphy Limited were able to prove that Loan Bank knew what was in the company constitution and said, well, we sent it to them every year, or we sent it to them specifically before we borrowed the money, it's not our fault if they didn't read it or if they ignored it, you can potentially prove that. So that might swing the balance in favor of Murphy Limited. And the only last thing that you could potentially do is show the activity was not legal in the first place. Now, you know, building, you know, developing land and so on, usually subject to planning permissions is legal, but, you know, there may be an argument you could go down that way that says, well, yeah, we're building stuff on land, but actually it was a protected site or something, or it's completely counter to planning permission or something like that. So actually we were breaking the law in another way. So, you know, it's a little bit of a shot in the dark, but it is a possible way of wriggling out of it as well. Okay. So that's the answer to question 2 in the mock paper. Any questions on that? Okay, good. So question 3, short question, long answer. So question 3 is on EU law, okay? And question 3 in the real exam will also be on EU law. So the question is, Commission wants to cut greenhouse gas emissions across the EU. They settle on a figure of 33% reduction over a 10-year period. Describe how this proposal would progress through the EU institutions to become binding on the member states. Okay. So there's 3 stages where such a proposal would work its way through the various institutions. Okay. First stage, which I think is the longest one, is the consultative stage. Okay. So and that starts at the Commission. Okay. So the Commission is the first player in the process as they initiate EU policy, and they submit, what they do is they will submit a proposal to the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament for consideration. Okay. They will take into account the individual interests of the member states. Okay. So for instance, let's say the cutting greenhouse gases is going to have a very negative impact on farmers. Okay. It's one of a number of groups that could happen, but let's just say for a moment that they are by far the ones that are going to be impacted the most. And let's say there's 1 or 2 EU states, which could potentially include Ireland, where farming is maybe more important than it is in other EU states. The Commission would take this into account. Okay, so options they might be, well, okay, we say it says 10%, but maybe we will allow Ireland to only reduce by 7, or maybe we give them 12 years to do it. That's not that likely, to be honest, given you know these things are usually designed for the benefit of the EU overall rather than going that. But it is a possibility that's a direction they could go. Let me see. So before the Commission will propose the initiative, what it will do is it will assess the economic, the social, and the potential environmental consequences on the whole of the EU community and its citizens. So what they will do is they will talk to a number of different groups, okay? So, you know, if we think of greenhouse gases, and I'm kind of thinking this off the top of my head, but in terms of greenhouse gases, I would probably say the biggest contributors are kind of big business, energy companies, farming organizations, and then motor cars, okay? So those are probably the four. So what they will do is the Commission will consult with representatives from each of those, so big business, energy groups, farming organizations, and cars, to get an understanding as to what the impact of this change might be and what alternatives there might be to it. You know, how easy or difficult is it to replace one way of doing farming or motor cars or electricity with something else, okay? So they will assess that impact and then take that into consideration, okay? When all that is done, they will send reports to the Parliament and the Council of Ministers to consider whether or not to adopt the proposal, okay? That's all in stage one, which is known as the consultative stage. Stage two is the review stage, okay? And this is similar to the Dáil Committee, where the Dáil Committee stage, where the Dáil Committee reviews a proposal from the relevant minister to make a change. Okay, that's discussed briefly in module 1. Okay, but it's a similar bit, but it's at EU level. Okay, so it will be discussed by the Council of Ministers and the Parliament. If they can not agree on the amendments that it's going to take place, what happens is a second reading takes place. Okay, and on the second reading, both groups go back and they consider what the change is, and they put forward amendments that are to the Parliament that may change the legislation. Okay, if at the second reading the amendments cannot be agreed upon either, the Parliament has an option of blocking the legislation if they can't agree upon it. Okay, both institutions, so again, that's the Council of Ministers and the Parliament, they will go back again and they will try to find changes that may work and allow it to be successful. If still they can't agree, then a committee will be formed between the Council of Ministers and the Parliament, and they will work to try to find a solution, okay? Because the Commission are not proposing it for the good of their health. Both the Council of Ministers and the Parliament can still block the legislation at the final reading, okay? So you can understand why it takes a long time to get things done in the EU, okay? And finally, the third stage is the adoption stage, okay? So the Parliament votes on it, okay? And vote on it and it passes, then it'll be enforced upon the member states, okay? If it rejects it, there's an opportunity again to go back and so on and review it between the Council of Ministers and the Parliament, and then repeat the process, okay? So that's a quick kind of summary of it, but that is the answer to the third question on EU law and reduction of carbon emissions. Any questions on that? Okay, tricky one, but it is there. Different. I'll tell you about it more in a few minutes, but the real one is going to be a bit different. Okay, so we're doing pretty well. We're catching up on the time that I lost previously. So the last question is on tort. Okay, and this question, similar to the contract one, this question is there in your notes, so you can digest it in your own time as well. It's there in module 4. Okay, so we'll go down through it. Declan is a young teenager who's been bullied by another young boy, Rod, in his class at school. Rod has been taking Declan's lunch money and threatening to beat him up if he tells anybody. For months now, Rod has been making Declan's life a living hell. Walking home from school one day, Declan notices that local farmer, Tom Brown, has left the gates to a field open, and being naturally curious, he wanders in. The field contains a large barn, and it too is unlocked, so Declan wanders in there to nose around. He searches through some presses and finds a shotgun. The farmer has a license for the shotgun and is a member of the local gamekeeping community, a fact that is well known in the community. The gun is empty, but after a more thorough search of the barn, Declan finds some shells. He hides the gun and shells in his school bag and heads home. The following day, Declan arrives at the school and sees Rod playing in the yard. He takes out the shotgun, which is already loaded, turns it on Rod and shoots him, causing serious injury. Declan has also suffered an injury himself because of the kickback from the gun. Rod's parents want to bring an action of negligence against Tom Brown because they believe that any person who owns a gun should be legally responsible for injuries caused by that gun. Okay. And there's 4 different questions afterwards. Okay. Now 4 is a lot. Okay. So in the real one, we actually have that shortened down to just 2. Okay. Now there's nothing to stop you bringing, maybe elements from outside it into those 2, but there is actually only 2 in the main one. Okay. So you won't have to do as much writing as you potentially would have to do with this one. Okay. So the first question that's asked underneath those facts is, to bring a successful negligent action, what are Rod's parents required to prove? Okay, so very quickly, I mean, in contract, there's the 4 elements: there's offer, acceptance, consideration, and intention for legal relations. Similar in tort. Okay, for negligence. Okay, I mean, what we're looking out for negligence is there a duty of care? Is there a breach of the duty? Is there damage? And is there connection between the 2? Okay. All right. So, I mean, in terms of there being a duty of care, so it's not that difficult. And again, I'll repeat, I mean, you can take a different view and you can argue something different, but excuse me, but in terms of my opinion, there's not a huge amount of, I don't think it's that difficult to prove a duty of care when it comes to guns. Okay. There's a pretty big duty that comes with it, because they're among the most dangerous things that maybe a regular person can maybe get their hands on. Okay, so the duty of care, proving a duty of care for me in terms of a gun is not that difficult. If the gun is locked in a gun safe with a key, and the key is kind of in the pocket of the farmer, or there's a very sophisticated combination lock on the gun safe, have you been successful? Have you followed your duty of care, and have you been responsible? In my view, yes. Okay, if anything less than that, which definitely exists in this case, you probably have breached your duty of care. So the key question, as always, to be asked in relation to breaching of a duty of care is, what would a reasonable person do or not do? Okay, is it reasonable for a shotgun to be in a barn that is not locked and also have the pellets separate in the barn? In my view, no. You might see differently, but you're free to go and try and argue that. But in my view, no. Okay, so I think that it's easy enough to prove a duty of care with guns, and it's easy enough to prove a breach of duty given the facts that are there. Is there damage? So yes, there is damage. That bit is going to be fairly undisputed. Rod gets shot, so he is damaged. Declan is injured because there's kickback from the gun. So is there damage? I think literally a line, max 2 in your answer would cover that. Okay. And then finally, the causal link. So the causal link is an interesting one, and that's where you'd probably spend the most amount of time in your answer, is linking the 2. Okay. So what if the gate had been locked? Okay. Now, you can actually say, I mean, as I said earlier, you can say, okay, if Declan climbed over the gate, then X. If Declan could not have climbed over the gate because it was too high or got barbed wire all over it or something like that, then no. You're perfectly entitled to imagine a little bit and can say that. So is there a link between the gate being open and the injuries? Possibly yes, possibly no. But one thing that's certainly mentioned in the notes is it's not uncommon for gates to be unlocked in the country, and that's, I'm not from the country, but that from my limited knowledge is pretty true. Should the barn have been locked? I think if the gun, had the gate not been open, could Declan have gotten in? You can argue maybe yes, maybe no. Had the barn been locked, could Declan have gotten in? That's probably a stronger one than the gate. You're less, if it's locked, Declan is likely to just walk away and go on his way. It's unlikely there's going to be a way into the barn unless there's a big window right next to the door that you can climb, that is open and you can climb into. Okay. And then finally, the gun being available and the pellets being available, is there a link between that and what happens between Rod and Declan? Yes. So those would be the type of things you'd be looking to put in the first answer. Okay. So there's a couple more that we need to cover off. Or any questions just on the basic negligence claim? Okay. So the second part is, will Tom Brown have the defense of contributing negligence? Okay, so can Tom Brown basically say, well, it's Rod's fault because he bullied Declan? Again, you're talking about a similar thing. You're following through the links. Okay, so because Rod bullied Declan, would it be reasonable for Rod to assume the day will come where Declan will come with a loaded gun to school and shoot me? Probably not. Okay. The likelihood of it, thankfully, still remains fairly unlikely. Okay, especially we can assume this is in Ireland. Okay, so is is there a strong connection between, well, if Rod hadn't done, if you're Tom Brand's lawyer, you're likely to be saying, well, if Rod hadn't bullied Declan wouldn't have gone and stuff. And yeah, that's probably true. But the link of kind of, is it reasonable for Rod to assume, oh God, I better not bully Declan because he's going to go into Tom Brown's field, he's going to get hold of the gun, he's going to load it up, he's going to shoot me. That's a very tenuous link from one to the other. Okay, so that would be the answer to that. Okay, again, you can argue a different way, but that would be my take on it. Rod's parents believe that Tom Brown was negligent because he left the gates open, because he left the shotgun in unlocked barn, and because Declan was able to find the shells. For each of the allegations, determine the actual causation. So we've actually, unfortunately, this second time in a row I've done this, but I've kind of covered that off already. Okay, I should have waited and just come to that, but that was covered off from the earlier piece, so I just went through it with you. So is he negligent because of the unlocked bar, because of the unlocked gate? In my view, you can argue that in the gate. Is he negligent because of the unlocked barn? The what if? In my view, yes, on the unlocked barn, maybe less so on the gate, but the unlocked barn, definitely yes. And he is, in my view, 100% negligent because the gun is not locked away and the pellets are not somewhere far away from the gun. Okay. So strong case there. Okay. And then the last bit is, can Declan himself bring a case for action against Tom for his injury? The short answer is yes, he can. He's under, you can assume he's at school, so you can assume he's under 18, unless he's well into sixth year, which you're entitled to kind of say, well, if he's well into sixth year, maybe he's 18. But unless he's well into sixth year, he's almost certainly going to be a minor. Can he claim an action against the farmer for his injury? Yes, he can, because there's a much strenuous duty of care on adults than there is on kids. Okay, so he's a minor. It's up to the adult to make sure the stuff was locked away. Because the stuff wasn't locked away, he was able to get hold of it. He suffered an injury, never mind what happened to Rod, and therefore the farmer would be liable. So those would be my views on it. Okay, so there's a lot in there that would take a bit of time to answer. Although the questions do get a bit shorter as we go along, but a lot of time in there, but there's actually less in the main one. Okay, which I'm going to get onto in a second, unless there's any questions on
just
that.
Number 4 there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Or the D. Can Declan maintain a cause of action against Tom for his injury?
Yeah.
Would this then fall, as we assume that Declan is a child, that this would be different? Because generally, if you were traveling in a stolen car, you can't sue the driver if you know the car is stolen, because you were you're taking part of the crime. You see where I'm going here, yeah?
Very good example, yeah.
So in this case, since he has stolen the gun, obviously, he shouldn't have had it in the first place. He didn't just fiddle at something lying on a table,
100% correct, and I couldn't have put it better myself. So yes, if let's and this, you're certainly heading for high marks if you go down this road and you're able to get this into your answer. So I mean, a very interesting scenario would be, okay, let's imagine that Declan is over 18. It's night and day, it's light switch type thing. When you're 17 and 11 months, these are the rules. When you're 18 and 1 month, the rules are completely different. So yes, you're completely right. The action would probably, there could certainly be a case between Rod, who was the boy who was injured, and the farmer, even if Declan is over 18. But there's a pretty good chance, and let's say that farmer is very rich. Rod's parents might say, well, okay, the likelihood of getting damages and significant damages is maybe a bit higher from Rod, so we're going to sue. Sorry, is going to be the farmer. So maybe we sue the farmer rather than suing Declan. But you could sue the two. You could certainly sue. You're not very likely to be successful. I mean, okay, we haven't got into criminal law and so on, that side of things. So you could certainly have a criminal case and so on. But even if Declan's a minor, but you're probably not going to get very far with an actual civil case against a minor. If he is over 18, and you're more than welcome to write this into your answer. If he is over 18, I would say the requirements on the farmer are probably still fairly high, given we're dealing with guns. Maybe less so if we're dealing with cars, but with a gun, I'd say they're still pretty high. But does Declan reach the stage where now he may have some responsibility and he could be in some legal trouble and sued for negligence? Absolutely, if he's an adult,
Okay, fair enough. All right, thank you.
Okay. Any more questions on question 4 before we get on to the real exam? Okay, I'm very pleased because we've caught up nicely. Okay, so on the real exam. Okay, so again, first thing I need to say, very important to say, the multiple choice questions. Okay, so we're not going to go through them, but they are worth 40 marks out of 100. Okay, so they are worth quite a bit. Okay, they will cover modules 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so you're going to have a good knowledge of 1, 2, 3, and 4. And unfortunately, this may be the downside of law versus maybe international. It's not going to be a great exercise to try and just randomly find the answers. You're going to run out of time. Okay, so I would have a good working knowledge of what is in modules 1, 2, 3, and 4, because the MCQs are pretty easy marks. Okay, they're black and white, yes and no. Okay, we are only looking for one answer. It's important to call out. Okay, because I have had people before who give me 2 or 3 answers. We're only looking for one answer in each question. Okay, but they're pretty easy marks. But the downside is you are going to need to know modules 1, 2, 3, and 4 to get them. What I've seen in the past is people will be flying along. They'll have everything right, and then they hit the section on tort or they hit the section on EU, and all of a sudden they get all of them wrong or all bar one wrong. And it's clear they haven't really studied that particular section. So that doesn't mind, I don't get insulted by that, but it is a little bit of a pity that they then end up with a lower mark, whereas if they'd studied that section a bit better, they would have kept going with their really good score, So very important to say, it's important to cover modules 1, 2, 3, 4 in order to get the maximum marks in your MCQs. Now, on the long questions, you don't have the same requirements. Okay, there's 4 questions. You only need to do 2. So there are 2 that you can completely forget about. Okay. All right. Now, in terms of what's in them, question 1 is on contract law. Okay. It's not the same question, obviously, as we have in the mock, but the questions are not actually that dissimilar. I mean, I can pretty much give you the questions, because the question is, if I remember correctly, is okay, well, is there a contract? Okay, different set of facts, but is there a contract? Okay, that's what's in question 1. That's part A. And then part B is, okay, what are the defenses? Okay, what are the defenses that can be used by the defendant to say, well, this, that. Sorry, cross it out completely. I got that wrong. What are the remedies? Okay, let's say there's a breach of contract. What are the remedies that can be put in place? Okay, so court says, yeah, absolutely, breach of contract. What can the court order the defendant to do or not do that will solve the problem? Okay. So part A is there a contract? Yes or no? And part B is, what are the remedies? Okay, if there's been a breach of contract, what are the remedies that the defendant could be asked to do to put things right? Okay. Similar to the mock exam, it's going to be some facts. It's going to be offer acceptance, consideration, intention of legal relations. That's what we look for. There's also, as I said, little bit of a curveball, a little bit of extra information in there which you need to discuss. Okay, nothing that's not in the notes. It's there. But some additional factor. It was the postal rule in the mock exam. It was the fact that Bobby Byrne was a minor in the assignment. It's something like that you need to also talk about. Okay, so it's not just going to be offer acceptance, consideration, legal relations, done. It's going to be there's going to be a little bit more to it. Okay, so that's question 1. Question 2 is on company law. So that's from module 2. Okay. In the mock exam, we talked about ultra vires and could the company do X, Y, or Z. It's not that. Okay, it's more to do with kind of the end of the, things have gone pretty wrong. So the end of a company's life, or maybe the likely end of a company's life, that kind of direction. Okay, it is a practical kind of exam. So it's not kind of a case of, well, list off the benefits of this, that, and the other, which are all in the notes. It's you have to kind of take the notes and apply it to a small set of facts. Okay, so that's what we're looking for in company law. So it's not ultra vires. It's more to do with the end of a company's life, and what the options might be. The stuff in the notes, but you need to apply what's in the notes to the small set of facts. Nothing tricky, but the small set of facts that are in the exam. And that would be your answer for question 2. Question 3 in the mock exam was, okay, so let's talk about the EU wants to make this change, talk about the journey that this proposal will have through the institutions. What we're dealing with is not the same question, but it's kind of a what happened next type scenario. So we get a little bit further on. The EU has implemented the right greenhouse reductions in 33% greenhouse reductions over 10 years. They've implemented that. We have member states that are not following it. What happens? Okay, so that is detailed in the notes. Okay, again, you need to apply it and kind of, well, if this happened, this would be the way. If that happened, that would be the way. So, so that's what we're looking for question 3. Okay, what happened next? Okay. And then finally, question 4 is on tort. Okay, so again, negligence comes up. Okay, well, so there's a set of facts. In this case, there are 3 injured parties. So there were potentially two injured parties in the mock. There's actually 3 injured parties in this one. So we talk about, okay, so is there negligence? Okay, so you need to prove there's negligence. You need to talk about, is there a breach of duty? Is there a duty of care to begin with? Is there a breach? Is there damage? And is there a good, strong enough link between the two to link the two and to say that that the plaintiff is negligent? So that's the first part we're talking about. And then the second part we're talking about, there's only 2, so there's 4 in the mock, but only 2 in the real one. Second one is, this is the one where you have the defenses. Okay, so what could, let's say the defendant loses and there is negligent, or is losing in the case, shall we say, and it looks like there's going to be negligent. What can the defendant say is, well, it's not my fault because of this, that, or the other. What defenses? There is a section on defenses in tort of 5 or 6 defenses, so that would be relevant in answering question 4. Okay. Breakdown of marks is there's 40 available for the MCQs. There is 30 available for the first long question. There is 30 more available for the second long question. So that gives you the 100. We will then convert that score back into marks at a 70, and then we will add back in your scores for assignment 1, assignment 2, each of which are worth 10, and then the last 10 points go for your short tests, which you've all done very well on. So they will be your final bit to give you a score out of 100. Any questions?
Coming to example.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead and
no, just coming to say, will we be required to remember, like, the smoke ball on the year that law, that happened and stuff, like?
Well, from my point of view, I'll be the one correcting it, I suppose. So from my point of view, no, it doesn't hurt to remember it. So have to remember it, no. Does it help to put it in, and does it show off kind of knowledge and understanding and how it links to the facts that you're trying to talk about? Yeah, if you get it in, it certainly could be worth some marks. Yeah. But will I be deducting marks and saying, oh, well, there was an act there and that was kind of key? And so, if it's very key to the answer, yeah, but not. But I don't really think that scenario would arise. I think it's more a case of it be a benefit to mention it rather than you're going to be penalized for not mentioning it.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, and I also think, Paul, the secret to good answers in law is to back up your answer with facts. So it's not so much your opinion that matters. It's, I'm saying this because this happened. So the likes of the Parabolic Smoke Company, it is a famous case in law, and it defines a principle. So if you're citing a principle, you're certainly heading into distinction territory here. So if you cite a principle and then you say, well, in this case, this was established, it just gives weight to your answer, that it's not just your own opinion, you're backing it up with facts, and that's a large part of the thought processes within law. So look, that is that. Well done, Paul. I think you covered everything very well. So hopefully everybody else is happy and you have a better idea now what to expect, and you're looking forward to getting it all out of the way this day 2 weeks and going off and enjoying hopefully what will be a super summer. So guys, we'll wrap it up there. You know where we are if you need anything, and good luck with it all, and hopefully you've enjoyed the process up to now. So I'll hit stop and have a great weekend.